Okay, this is the start of the next episode in Not a Victim, a Survivor, Life Beyond Domestic Violence and Rape. It's my book. It's available on Amazon in e-tablet form or book form. And I decided to do the podcast because this is the first book of a series and that I've done, and I wanted it to I wanted you to be able to hear from my own words my story, and I also wanted you to, I guess, if you have any comments or questions, you're welcome to message me, and I'll do my best to answer them. But this is the first book in the series Life Beyond Silence, and I'm hoping the podcast gives me the ability to close out the other two and get them published on Amazon as well. Um, so let's get started. So it soon became a dream come true for me. Phil and I were like two peas in a pod. I was his old lady, and we were seen everywhere together. I'm not really for sure I like that I wrote that because I was only 29. Anyway, either we were at home with the kids or being a family that I had always hoped for. Not to mention his interest and delight in my kids was extraordinary. It was almost like he was their father. He did things right from the beginning as though we had always been together, and and always would be. The girls really took to him. After all, Phil was funny, full of energy. We often went to feed the ducks in the park, took long walks. We took the kids to the swim bog or the German swimming pool. We went to street festivals and even Army Family Day. We spent paydays at the commissary and the PX, which the PX is like the Army's version of Kmart or Walmart. Phil even managed to cook on occasion, spaghetti and things like that. All in all, he took the time to care and enjoy life when he was with us. Then there was the nightlife side of us, where Doc and his old lady were popular amongst the crowd. Phil was extremely popular, and as a couple, whenever we did manage to go out, we were like celebrities. Everyone knew us. A lot of times we didn't even make it down the street without people stopping us. It was exciting to be popular, and Phil had a huge following. Like I've said before, at the time it was like stars. I was seeing stars. I was so happy. And even though I should have seen the red flags and should definitely not jumped into that one, at the time, it's just what happened. I fell for him, and I really enjoyed being with him, and I was looking really good back then, and he looked good to me. It was just a mistake, but I did it. But as I said before, his huge following and the way that he was popular was based on the stick. It was based on this persona that he had developed for himself, because he wasn't always like that. He just developed it and ran with it. And when he saw that he was popular by being this charming, you know, blonde, uh, dress nice, smell nice, look nice. All of that was attractive to people. Everybody wanted to be him, or everybody wanted to be with him. And there I was, 29, two kids, three kids actually, three kids, and I was getting a divorce. And I was going back to the States as well. It was it was kind of like a roller coaster. I thought the world of him. I was in love with him, but I just didn't see what a mistake it was. Okay, let's get back. All the young GIs thought he was cool and tried to get his advice on things, from the clothes they wore to whom they should ask out. I, on the other hand, seemed to be gathering a small following of my own. Although it had a lot to do with me dating Phil, in time I soon became a hot little item myself. A lot of guys would hit on me and a lot of girls knew me. However, most girls were jealous of me. After all, I was with Doc. Everyone thought we made a really cute couple. We always dressed well, and both of us at least seemed extremely cool. Also, we both were exceptionally good dancers, and for the most part, we were like big brother and sister to everyone we knew. Phil was 24, and I had been married once, and that was considered old and experienced in the GI world. After all, our entire crowd mostly contained 19 and 20-year olds who had never held a real job and never been married. I was, on the other hand, 29 and consequently ancient in their eyes. Some were really stunned once they found out that I had been married more than once and had three small kids. It was as though they thought I should be literally tied to the house, taking it easy, and listening to some kind of elevator music. They were all stunned at how I was not only cool, but had a great body and was intelligent. To the guys, I became somewhat of a mother figure. They ate at my house almost constantly, and sometimes I'd even do their laundry and ironing. Oh yeah, ironing. I know it doesn't really happen in the real world, but in the military, they pretty much all have an iron because when they do their fatigues, they do their dress, they have to make crisp lines and they have to iron the pockets down. And if they roll their sleeves up, most of them put like a good steam iron to it so that it stays pristine. I'll never forget Thanksgiving 1989. We had 6 over for dinner and I baked 2 turkeys and had a whole bunch of pumpkin pies. Not to mention all the trimmings. Everyone stuffed themselves and sat around watching movies all day. We were like one big happy family. I also want to point out I never really had very many VHS tapes before I went to the military, before I went overseas. But going overseas, they really only have like 1 or 2 channels. And most people at that time didn't really watch much TV unless it was videos. And back then it was all VHS tapes. And I just, it was an obsession with me to get all the new VHS movies and to like, I mean, I even had cartoon VHS movies, but I had like thousands of them by the time I came back in 1990. Anyway, everyone stuffed themselves and sat around watching movies all day long. We were like one big happy family. I felt good about life and about Phil. All my dreams seemed to be coming true. On Halloween 1989, Phil and I helped fix a haunted house in his barracks for his unit. I even rode around with his captain's wife, buying all the decorations. I dressed up as a witch and Phil as a soldier of fortune. It soon became evident to both of us that we were meant to be together and we should get married as soon as my divorce was final. Okay, I know what you're thinking. But I was, like I said, seeing stars. And I was totally infatuated with him. In love, infatuated, however you want to put it. To me, Phil was like my next chance at knight in shining armor. Anyway, soon it was January 1990, and the kids and I left for Germany. I left a couple of days prior to Phil's departure, but both of us were bound for Kentucky in hopes of finding jobs and a place where we could start our new lives together. Now, I didn't evidently put this right there, but so I don't know exactly what month I met him in, but it was like the end of 1989 when Kyle had already left and for the barracks, and it was over between us, and Phil moved in. And when he moved in with me, um, he basically was there all the time. He played daddy. Um, we did everything together, and we would get babysitters when we went out. So there's a lot, I guess, that I didn't say that I will say later, but by the end of 1989, we were watching TV and actual TV. And on the Armed Forces Network, it was playing that the wall was coming down. And I'll never forget that. We were sitting there, and we had some of his friends there, and they had been saying that there were talks and that it was gonna fall, and that was exciting to the Germans, and of course it would be. It it I can't even imagine how they must have felt because, well, I can imagine how they must have felt because I'd lived there for so long. I knew that most Germans had family on the other side of the wall that somehow had either been living there or got caught there, and they were always hopeful that they would someday see their family members. And um, Berlin is like, not only is it a big city in Germany, but at the time it was split between, it was like you drive through West Germany and then you're in East Germany, but the route for Berlin is open because Berlin has a west side and an east side. And the wall separated Berlin into the two parts. And a lot of soldiers would travel to see it and to be a part of the Berlin experience. I never went to Berlin. I went all around Germany and I went to a couple of other countries, but I didn't go to Berlin. The wall itself, though, was basically cinder blocks, um, just concrete blocks. And there was graffiti. I don't know about the east side, but on the west side there was a lot of graffiti. And there was barbed wire at the top of it. And there was a middle part where the East Germans could actually shoot people that got through the East German side that were trying to cross into the West German side. I don't know how that would have been feasible for the most part, but um, yeah, it was huge, and that it might fall. And we were watching TV when it fell, and you could see people on top of it and around it, all with sledgehammers, breaking it apart as fast as they could break it apart. It had come, I guess the news was basically saying that they were going to be able to tear it down. They had reached an agreement to consolidate West and East Germany, and that and trust me, I don't know the particulars. I mean, I was only 29 and my kids were the priority, and of course Phil was the priority, but I wasn't paying much attention to politics back then, other than to know that this was huge. And I remember I said, like, right off the bat, this is big. You all have no idea how big this is. This, trust me, will end the Americans being over here. And I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it, because like I said, I wasn't really following politics or anything. But I knew it was the start of something huge. It's not that the Germans didn't want us there. I think most of the older Germans appreciated us being in West Germany so that we could protect them in some way, or that we had been there when the uh, country of Germany had broken apart. All I remember is when I saw it and saw the East Germans and the West Germans coming together in being unified again. I just felt like, well, that's absolutely great for all these families. But now that they're going to be unified as a country again, then I could just see it. I could just see that it was going to be an opportunity for Germany to say, we no longer need Americans protecting us. And that could have been in the unification process. Looking back at it now, at my age, it could have been part of the agreement to unify Germany and to give the country the chance to be a whole country again. that they run the Americans out. And I'm not saying that they completely ran the Americans out. As far as I know, at this present time, which I don't know that at this present time, there could be some Americans that still are present in Germany, but for the most part, every concern, which a concern is kind of like what we call forts here, because like here, when it's a military army base, they usually say like Fort Dix or uh, Fort Campbell. Different forts is what they call them. But in Germany, they're called Kasernes, which is basically the same thing. But um, all the soldiers we knew were at different Kasernes, and they were all. We lived in Hanau, and I lived in Hanau, and so they're right down the street from me were three Kasernes, and then my ex Kyle, he worked at a different concern that was a driving distance from where I lived. Um, but they were scattered all over Germany. So many concerns. Every town basically had a either a big one or a small one, and or multiples. And when the wall came down, it was virtually immediate that they were all given the, I guess, notification that they would be closing the concerns, and all the soldiers would be then transferred to other places, other countries, or back to the States. And I remember Kyle had told me that you didn't really have your pick of where you would go. He had already known was going back to the States because we were kind of finishing our duty, but nobody that it was sprung upon had a choice. They might have been sent to a different country. They might have been sent to Korea. They might have been sent to other countries or bases just about anywhere in the world. But they didn't necessarily have, it wasn't like their pick. They couldn't really have their pick. Anyway, and I'm sure a lot of people got out. I'm positive of that too. A lot of people took early outs and got out because of the closures, maybe. But don't quote me on any of that. Was never that privy on military information. I just remember when the wall came down, that was my perception, and my orders came pretty quickly, but I was already getting orders anyway, but my orders came pretty quickly because me and Kyle were getting a divorce, and I was expecting orders anyway, but that kind of also pushed an urgency to it. And then Kyle ended up getting orders and Phil was getting out, so he was going to follow me back to the States. And I left for Kentucky, and Phil's departure was pretty well right after my departure. And he wanted out because a lot of soldiers, when they go into the service, they do the minimum amount of time that's basically required. They don't necessarily, they might do a second um, they might sign up for a repeat, but most of them don't do but two tours. They don't like um, pretty much 2 or 4 years is about the limit on most people. Um, but my ex, Kyle, was a lifer. He did his 20, which is extremely um, honorable. I feel like he really did his due, and he loved it. He did. He loved the military. And I think Phil loved it too, but I think he also had envisioned, because of his MOS, which is kind of like their title, he was medical. So he, I guess, had envisioned it gave him a career outside of the military. I also thought it somehow did, because I was already medical in my background, but with him being medical, it I kind of thought, okay, this will transfer really easy to being a civilian. But that did not happen. And I'll say that later on in the book too. But in Kyle's um, MOS, he did computer work on M1 tanks, and it was a lot of tactical information. I don't know. I don't know exactly what he did, but I knew that his did not transfer to the civilian well, except for computers, of course. But um, he did that, and I actually didn't know at the time, but when he got out, he wanted to do aviation. So he's now a pilot, and so that's also a very good career choice. So he got out of the military after 20 years, and now he's a pilot. So I think that's awesome, and I'm very happy for him. But I will say, I still think our marriage was doomed, and I don't think it would have worked out, because he did several more years after we were divorced, and I just don't think I would have been able to stay with him. I just don't think it ever would have worked out. But as I said previously on another episode, at this very time, he's on his honeymoon with his new wife, and they're going around the country, and I'm very happy for him. And she's a very nice woman, so I'm very happy for the both of them. Anyway, so um, my daughters, I had my three children. Um, Unbeknownst, really, um, to my family, of course, I came back with my three daughters, but I was pregnant with my fourth baby. And although we both anticipated the response that we would get would be one of shock, we were extremely happy, and no matter how hard it is to believe, my pregnancy was kind of planned for two reasons. Phil said he wanted a child of his own, and my age was beginning to be a factor. After all, I would be 30, and to me, I was at the very tail end of when I could get pregnant, and I wanted my kids close together. So if I was going to have another kid, I wanted them all to be pretty stair-stepped. My first two were 2 years apart, and my last two are 3 years apart. And there was like 3 years in between the first two and the last two. So they're all kind of scattered between 1981, 1983, 1987. So it's 5 years between the first two and the last two. And then 87 and then 90. So it was all in the 80s. 81, 83, 87, and then 90. So, um, anyway, so after um, all, basically, I wasn't getting any younger, and Phil and I were hoping so much for a little boy. I already had my three girls, and this pregnancy, no matter what, was going to be my last. Our lives started off pretty good. We moved into a 4-bedroom house. I started back doing nursing. Phil had some trouble at first finding work, but he eventually enrolled in a trucking school, and upon graduation started driving for an over-the-road company, driving semis cross country. Now, let me just say, at first he wanted to get it into the medical field. He came back and he had hopes that they would gladly take him because he loved doing that kind of work. He loved being medical, and he would have kept pursuing going higher in the healthcare industry. But when they didn't accept his military certifications, then he, I guess, had checked out a trucking school, and um, I have a lot to say about that. I mean, trucking schools are great. They train men, boys, young men, they train them, and women, to be truckers. And every state in our great country needs the trucking industry. That's how most of the goods get from point A to point B, is through semis and the trucking industry. And they're very well needed, and you have to have a CDL license, and if you're driving something that's carrying something that is considered hazardous, you have to have a hazmat um, at added part to your CDL. But and they're very good drivers for the most part. Truckers are the very top of drivers. They know what they're doing when they're driving down the road, for the most part. But I learned so much when he became a trucker. I learned, for one, that yes, they're trained, but a lot of people that go out, it's not for them. They go out thinking, A, they'll make decent money. They go out thinking, B, they'll be with a company that'll treat them right. And C, they go out thinking that they're going to be out there like 2 to 3 weeks, and then they'll be in for like a weekend or maybe a longer time period, and then they'll be back out for another 21 days or anywhere from 15 to 21 days, and then they'll be back in. I don't think the trucking schools or the companies are fair with their people. Maybe some of them are. I won't disregard everyone, but I don't think they really tell people, we can switch it up on you. Yeah, maybe you'll have some good weeks where you're out 3 weeks and in for 4 days, but for the most part, you might be out there for 30 days and in for 2. It could just happen on a dime. You might think you're coming in, and then you get another load, and we need you to, you know, go here, go there. You have no idea where we're going to send you or how long you're going to be out. And I think it's unfair, especially for people. I mean, there are truckers that live out there. They live trucking. And I think those are the ones that, just like lifers with the military, truckers are their own breed. I think there's some truckers that go out and stay out and have their own rigs, or aspire to have their own rigs. And I think they don't really have family, maybe don't have kids. Maybe they were married at once upon a time and they don't have custody of their kids. But I think for the most part, a lot of truckers are lifers. They know the road, and that's how they live, and they are out there. But there are some new truckers that get out there that aren't as um, schooled in trucking as they should be. And I think they go out there because when you go to the trucking school, like I said, they don't tell you stuff like that. And then even the companies make you, it's kind of like the military actually, because in the military, a lot of young servicemen sign up with the hopes of seeing the world. And yeah, you see the world, but your life is the military. Like, they have you signed your name on the dotted line, and they have you at least for 2 years. And then if you re-sign, it's 4 years. Or if you go to a foreign country, it could be 4 years. So once you've signed that dotted line, the world that they promised you might be in a foreign country, but you aren't off work until they tell you you are. And then you're expected to be back at work. And there is no, I didn't show up for work today. I mean, literally, your life is theirs. And I think that's the way trucking companies are. I think they get new truckers that are just out of school and they get them on the road. And when they get them on the road, their life is literally at the hands of these trucking companies. And if they don't like it, well, let's just say, um, if they don't like it, it can be bad. And a lot of young truckers find that out the hard way. So I'll just say that for right now, and then if I need to elaborate, I'll stop and elaborate again. Anyway, so Phil was usually gone for 2 to 3 weeks. More often than not, he was 3 weeks. Um, Maybe an extra couple of days, with an occasional weekend home. It was hard on the both of us since I was pregnant. He wanted so desperately to be there for the birth, and when the day finally did come, he was practically on his way out the door. It was June 24th, 1990, and I'd been back and forth for what I thought was leakage for amniotic fluid. However, I was going into labor early again, and they didn't want me to deliver. If I could just hold off for a little more, but when I started to spike a temperature, they said they would take him early. So that evening, I gave birth to my son, whose initials are CP. We got the blessing that we both had hoped for so desperately, a son, a bouncing baby boy. And although he was small, only weighing in at 5 pounds 9 ounces, the only real problem he seemed to have was a slight breathing problem due to his premature lungs. However, that had been expected, causing the delay of his release from the hospital. But all in all, it was truly a magical moment. I was awake and Phil was by my side. Whenever CP, my son, was born, they flashed his genitals in front of me and said, "It's about time for a boy." Then Phil and the baby was escorted from the operating room while my doctor proceeded with my tubal ligation. Phil told me all the details from there because I wasn't there. My son was given his first bath, and Phil was allowed to participate. He said they started to put an IV into his little scalp, and Phil said, having been a medic in the military, he almost pushed the nurse out of the way. I'm sure he thought he could have done a better job. Phil said the doctor came in and checked him and said that my son was fine. He was just having a little trouble breathing and a little smaller than what he might have hoped, and was a little smaller than what he might have hoped for. But there was no need to worry, he would be fine. I got out of the hospital pretty fast. I think it was about 4 days, and I'm not really sure about that, but my son stayed a little longer. I do know that when he finally did get to come home, he totally lit up his daddy's eyes. You see, Phil was adopted, and his mother had always been older than most mothers of of the other kids that he knew. Phil looked forward to being young enough to play catch with his little boy and coach Little League. My son was the only grandson on both Phil's side and my side. Phil soon got off the road after my son's birth, mostly because he was homesick for his new family and because he didn't want to miss anything. After all, there's a lot that goes on in those first few months, and he didn't like being left out of any of it. So now I'll go back and say, Phil one time just called me and right after my son's birth and said, I'm done. I'm going to leave my load and I'm going to leave my truck at a truck stop and call them and tell them I'm turning over my stuff to, I guess there's a person at the truck stop that handles all the money cards and things like that. And he said, I'm just going to call them and tell them I'm done. And you need to drive and pick me up. And I was like, what? You can't do that. I mean, we had spent thousands. We were indebted to the trucking company. Not the trucking company itself, but the trucking school. And plus, if you do stuff like that, you'll get fined and you really won't get a paycheck. So we were like, that hurt really bad that he called and said that, because that meant that he was going to be fined and he might not get a good check. And that also meant we paid for trucking school and now you're doing this? What in the world? Like, I was so upset because we needed money and we had a new baby. And what in the world was he going to do? He basically was quitting his job. So, yeah, that was rough. Really, really rough. But I remember I drove like overnight to wherever he was and picked him up. I think he was like 6, 7 hours from where we lived, and I drove with all of my children in the car and went and found him in the night, found him and picked him up. And I was so upset. I'll just never forget that. Anyway, I'm going to leave this here at this moment because I always run my podcast a little long and I really don't mean to. I just get to talking and I can't stop. But please continue listening and I'll be back. Thank you.